Morning, everybody, and welcome to this session. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Neil Fowler. I'm the GM of Micro Focus's Application Modernization and Connectivity Product Group, one of our 6 product groups. Delighted to be joined here by Stuart.
And I'm Stuart McGill, and I'm CTO of Micro Focus, also looking after our application modernization to cloud business.
Thanks, Stuart. So we'll start off today. Hopefully you've just seen the announcement from Adam at the keynote regarding the AWS Mainframe Modernization Service, and this is directly related to that with some of the core technology that's powering the replatform. So if we look at where organizations started, many of them started on the mainframe platform where the single environment, which was COBOL, CICS, JCL, but over time, that actually extended into distributed client server. And that was always in addition to, rather than instead of. And as that time continued, the complexity continued to increase, such that these systems, whether it be PaaS systems, hybrid cloud, private, public cloud, were all integrated into that same platform and environment. So the time to be able to deliver solutions, the time to be able to respond to conditions, the complexity of that environment just continued to increase, as well as all of the attack surfaces from a security perspective as well. So what we see is lots of organizations that are really struggling to be able to deliver with speed and reducing the complexity to be able to make sure they can respond to the digital transformation exercises that they're going through. So when we speak to our customers and we ask them what modernization means, we get a variety of different answers. And they're all right, because depending on what they're trying to achieve, what these things are describing, what's mean to them is what's really important to them. So when you look at it overall, it can be quite sort of overwhelming. But what we do within AMC is we focus this in 3 particular areas. We try to focus on application, process, and infrastructure modernization. And when you look at all those different drivers, those different complexities of what modernization means, this allows you to bring some focus into how to get results more quickly. So as part of that, what we've been working on, based on decades of experience, thousands of successful modernization projects, we've used that to actually understand not only how we'll do the maturity model, which I'll discuss in the next slide, but the approach in terms of the best way to actually get results from those core enterprise systems. Well, the key thing to also realize, there is no one-size-fits-all strategy. So you have to perform application analysis and actually go through, take that whole portfolio, an application at a time, and actually drive it through to understand what you're trying to achieve. Combination of both the business and the technical drivers. So let's look at some of these. The drivers will be different for every customer, will be different for almost every application. But when you're looking at it, you might be sitting there regarding cost optimization. You might be making these applications that you've got core systems available to web and mobile applications, and that's driving up the costs as the increased workload comes through. We saw with the impact of the pandemic, the operational risk of being able to maintain these IBM platforms into the future. You might be able to handle it today, but where are you going to be in a decade's time? Across the organization, the standardization that we see when we can't have 2 phases of development practices or deployment practices where one's using new technologies and others are using older. So as you go through that, the strategic alignment and as well as the time to be able to deliver solutions to the market and be able to be responsive with disruptive competition coming into the market. If you, as an established organization, can't respond, you lose your competitive advantage. At the same time, you have a bunch of technical drivers. So these would include trying to reduce the complexity of the application, trying to make sure that the application is available and can scale to meet the demands not of just today, but into the future. At the same time, ensuring that what you've got is maintainable and you can actually deliver it with security. So considering those 2 different drivers on there, then the strategy you come from each application that you see on the right-hand side, often referred to as the 6 Rs, the different approaches and different strategies you can take to modernize in these applications. So you might identify applications which are no longer required. Others could be replaced by a standard off-the-shelf product or a SaaS solution that might be able to deliver what you need. But there's significant value in a lot of these core applications. And from the surveys we've done with Vance & Bourne and others, we recognize that over 70% of those applications are still core and strategic to the organizations themselves. So the strategies which then come through there is regarding retain. This means the application is okay, and where it is okay. But you might need to improve the processes, introduce DevSecOps, and you've seen some announcements in the last week or so regarding some of the initiatives we have with our partners at DXC in terms of helping to progress that and move that forward to improve the development, security, operations processes of these applications. But what we're going to focus on for this next bit is similar to what was announced today regarding the AWS Mainframe Modernization Service, is regarding the replatform side. Replatform being able to take those applications and move them across to cloud and get all the benefits of cloud and actually use that as a platform for onward continuous modernization. So what I'll do now is quickly move across to the maturity model, which is something we introduced a few years ago. As I mentioned, this is based on the decades of experience and successful projects that we've been doing. So to some degree, it looks a bit simplistic to start with, but as you see here, and as mentioned before, on the left-hand side, we see infrastructure, application, and process. That's extended by ensuring from a successful project standpoint, we need to take on the management of the systems as well as the culture within the organization. Any project that's taking on a modernization maturity journey without addressing the cultural concerns within the organization is going to have more challenges. There's no such thing as good or bad on here, so it doesn't mean that one is bad and 5 is good. The whole point of this is trying to understand where you are today and where you need to get to deliver on those business drivers we just talked about. But the key thing around this is you can't just focus on one part of it, one layer. You have to make sure you take into account all of the different aspects to get a successful outcome. So to add a little bit of color into that, if you think about a move to cloud, that's infrastructure modernization. But if you move your application to cloud, depending on what you're trying to do, cloud ready could just be a general move to it. Cloud optimized means you'll start taking advantage of the PaaS capabilities, database as a service, or other systems, as well as moving all the way to the right-hand side for cloud native, designing more stateless microservices type architectures in terms of being able to get better value from these systems. But if you're driving that infrastructure model, you have to take into account the changes that might be required to the application in terms of moving away from monolithic architectures and operations practices, as well as the processes. If you want to take a mainframe COBOL CICS system and deploy it in a container on the cloud, which you can do with Micro Focus, you're not going to use a long development process. You're going to automate it, automate the infrastructure as code, automate the DevOps, the build, the deploy, and the operations. So the process has to go with it to get the most value out of this. But as I say, it's no such thing as a good or bad, and it really is trying to understand what you're trying to achieve from this to be able to get the best outcome possible. And that means you don't have to start with one journey. You can actually, as you move to these systems, you might have something which is deployed on the cloud, maybe mostly unchanged, but at the same time, you can start working on a different pattern, maybe code slicing, API enabling, being able to get microservices derived from these existing systems. And now you've unlocked the core data and business logic. You can integrate that into machine learning, artificial intelligence, and actually do a more complete analysis solution of that technology. So the journey here is not just about how to modernize and get that applications onto a more agile, scalable, dynamic platform, but it's also how to continue that journey as part of continuous modernization to get to the next level. So that's all good in terms of the theory and practice, but what we want to do now is actually just share with you some examples we've got from our customers and what they've said about it and how they've achieved these outcomes. So we've got a large range of case studies on our website, but what we do today is just select just from a few of them, and what I'll do is I'll ask Stuart in a few moments in terms of give a bit more detail about what they were trying to achieve and how they got to it. So let's start with a question. Why move applications to the cloud?
Well, I think there are two principal drivers that will be familiar to most of the people in the room, cost and speed. Actually, what's strategic for the business is normally speed. It's the agility of the IT operation to take the demands of the business and move to meet those demands within the applications portfolio that has been running their operations, their business processes for many, many years. We recognize that the intellectual property inside those applications actually represents real business process. They're not legacy applications, they're core applications running on legacy infrastructure. And that legacy infrastructure just can't operate at the speed that the business needs to meet the future requirements. Hence, typically, at a very top level and in the C-suite, it's the speed of operation, it's the speed of movement, it's the agility of the team to be able to react to circumstance that is far more strategic in the terms of the move to cloud than anything else. What quite often is strategic to IT, however, is actually saving money. It's the fundamental cost of the legacy infrastructure is now taking an increasing percentage of the budget that is spent in supporting the business. And that has to be taken under control. Similarly, we've heard a lot about data and data volume. Data volumes are escalating and accelerating. That's introducing more cost into the business to run an existing operation. This is an example of, for example, Kmart, which is obviously a retail operation. In their context, they needed to deliver new customer services, essentially their digital transformation around all of their retail operations. And they knew that they couldn't do that within the constraints of the legacy infrastructure that they had at their disposal. And any slight movement in trying to accelerate their journey meant a dramatic increase in cost to deliver that. Hence, for Kmart, they were really trying to tackle how do we deliver the agility in our business. And they recognized very early on, and indeed this is probably one of the earliest customers to actually move to AWS, they recognized very early on that that was a mechanism to deliver that both in terms of development and subsequently in terms of production.
And the other thing with Kmart is their project was completed in the middle of COVID, and it was all done remotely as well, which is quite an amazing achievement considering the challenges that introduces as well.
A different customer driven by cost in this particular context, meaning they started with a cost model that they recognized was not going to be able to support them. And this is a bank, by the way, Laboral is a bank. So their banking operations were fairly fixed. Their infrastructure was obviously going back a long time in their context, but it was running the business. So remember, this is quite a big decision for this bank. They bet their business probably for 30 or more years on the legacy infrastructure. The key thing is, how do they then move it? And why would they then move to cloud? Well, the first step is to have a business case that makes sense. And generally speaking, in our experience across over 1,000 projects, actually customers will save in the order of around 80% of operating costs in like-for-like infrastructure, both hardware and software, when they move from a mainframe environment to cloud. In total operating cost terms, that's about 50%. That's assuming that they're carrying all of their people with them on this journey from mainframe to cloud as well. Hence, it manages two elements of the digital transformation. One is the change of, obviously, infrastructure. The second is moving to a new cost model. But finally, it's also taking their skills forward into the future as well.
Good, thank you. Great stories there. Well, the other aspect of that is regarding from a strategy standpoint, what's the, we focus around the balance of cost, risk, and speed, but some more commentary here regarding what's the fastest, lowest cost, and least risk approach from a modernization strategy. So when we look at it, and you've probably seen lots of evidence or reports based on this, but this is backed up by Gartner and Standish, where the approach that people take in terms of how they look at these modernization journeys really has a big impact in terms of their success. We know, we've got lots of evidence, lots of studies regarding these stories in terms of a rip and replace or a rewrite. It's as you go through these different vectors of cost, risk, and speed, the rewrite strategy is the highest risk, the highest cost, and the lowest speed. And anybody, if you look at the success results which we see here from the Standish side, the success rates, because of that high risk, the success rates of actually starting with something and taking maybe a bold approach of actually trying to do a rewrite without really understanding the true value that is locked up in those enterprise applications, that intellectual property, the tested mechanisms that have been running for years and serving the business, without being able to reuse that and bridging from that existing system, those core applications, onto new platforms to allow them to transform as well as run the operation at the same time. That's where they get the value, and as you can see here from the numbers, a significantly better success rate. So, Stuart, how did Kmart and others in FIS use that as their model in terms of how they approach their modernization strategies?
Well, I think actually there are two very different approaches. The Kmart approach was a bit more fast and furious in terms of they actually had a very specific objective that they needed to deliver in a very short period of time to deliver to their business. And this is a prime example of how fast it can be to actually move off the mainframe to cloud. Their objective is literally to deliver their entire portfolio on the mainframe off the cloud in the matter of, well, it's just over a year in this particular context. Why is that important? Why did they do it in that way? Well, one of it is all of the links through their partner channels, their logistics channels, through everyone who's providing information to the business and is obviously receiving business back to it. If you're going to do a significant amount of change in that business process flow, then you're going to involve a lot of different parties outside of the business in order to manifest and successfully deliver. In Kmart's case, it was to take something that primarily worked for them, but deliver it on infrastructure that was certainly at a lower cost again, but allowed them to still innovate inside Kmart to take them forward into the future. FIS is a very different story. That's much more along a modernization journey that is reflected in the maturity model. They took the view that actually modernization never stops. It's continuous. You're just defining it in a series of steps that make sense for you and your customers in terms of moving forward. So just to put this into context, FIS is obviously in the financial services space. It's actually a platform called InvestOne that manages mutual funds and derivatives for all of their clients. Again, kind of a deep integration across many different partner channels. And the complexity of the application was less inside their own platform, but definitely in terms of how it reaches out into their own partner channels. For them, they'd spent years building up this expertise and actually creating competitive advantage for them with their competitors. And the last thing they wanted to do was throw that away and start from scratch, because frankly, experience is that if you do start from scratch, it takes you between 5 and 6 years to get back to where you started from in your new technology platform. In this context, they took the view that they could use modernization process with technologies that supported that to move at the pace that they needed to deliver, but also give them a platform for the future so that they were never closed off for any option that they were looking at. So frankly, FIS started their modernization journey without thinking about cloud.
Well, it was almost before cloud.
Yeah, the word cloud existed.
It was just in its infancy.
So, but they were easily able to extend into the cloud and into a containerized architecture and look forward through the process that they followed and using the technology foundations that we're able to deliver.
Just coming back onto, the FIS, because they've been a great customer of ours for a long time. But you're just saying there about that journey, and the time they took to complete that journey, because it's continuous. It isn't a stopping point. It's just what they needed to do to deliver the business today. So it was at least a decade ago they started moving the first systems off of the mainframe, and they continued that journey all the way through to actually now integrating COBOL and Java as a Java byte machine. So really taking it to that next level of modernization by continuing that process, as you said, Stuart, part of that modernization maturity model journey.
And they wouldn't consider it modernization anymore. It's just
business as
normal
usual.
business as usual for any development team. But another key element of the modernization maturity model is quite often the first step off the legacy infrastructure it does seem a large step. It takes maybe a year to do that. But the subsequent steps in the modernization journey are much more rapid, and you see a huge acceleration in the application delivery and the capability of the team managing those applications as you go forward. Hence, you tend to see an initial step that may take 12 months, 15 months, and then accelerate down into 3, 1 month, weeks, days, just using traditional, the agile techniques that we all use today.
I think that's a great point as well, because as we've seen not just with these customers, but many others, as they start getting used to the more iterative, agile, DevSecOps type processing, the speed that they can actually accelerate those projects and its integration across the whole of the sort of enterprise application team. It's not just slow, mainframe, fast, web. They're all running at the same speed, interoperating, getting the systems together. So it's great story and great successes from them both. Let's move on, and obviously something which is near and dear to us, but why do so many organizations choose Micro Focus's AMC solutions?
Firstly, obviously we have a deep understanding of the mainframe environment, and that's core. Going back to the start of the presentations, even though the business may be wanting to move to cloud as fast as possible, they recognize the business case, they understand the benefits that they're going to obtain. The primary inhibitor of doing anything is risk. They've been running on a platform probably for 40 years. There was the old mantra, which is, if you bet on IBM, you never lost your job. And to some extent, it's convincing the organization that cloud is just as fast, just as secure, just as scalable. It can deliver all of the same capabilities, and the risk management techniques may be different, but you're still absolutely secure in betting your job on moving the business to cloud. And that's the primary purpose of working with customers. And the way that Micro Focus does that is by having a very deep understanding of the mainframe applications themselves and the mainframe technologies. We have that capability in our platform. Quite often we get quite excited when someone calls it emulation. It's not. It's a true enterprise server with IBM mainframe compatibility built as a layer on top of that to ensure that it's fully performant, fully scalable, at the same time as being able to take applications, the code, the data, and move it as seamlessly as possible to the cloud platform. Because in doing that, customers can see almost like a before and after. They understand how their applications work today. They can deliver those same applications in the cloud tomorrow, and it de-risks the entire journey. Similarly, there's the element of testing is dramatically eased. Remember, if you don't change the application at all, does that merely mean you have to go out to your users and ask them to do a whole set of user testing, which consumes an awful lot of time and needs to be planned to drive that change? And if your primary objective is to move to cloud and deliver the cost savings, see the value within 18 months as a minimum, then of course you want to minimize all of the surrounding costs of the project. Hence, being able to move applications simply to cloud and then start the modernization journey is a huge value to all of our customers. And I think that's the uniqueness of the Micro Focus approach. And that's the uniqueness of actually working with both Micro Focus and indeed with AWS. To call it out, it was interesting looking at the timeline around AWS. We started working with AWS in 2006, almost after inception, to already start thinking about how cloud environments could benefit our customers. So it was a good reminder.
And as part of that, you heard me saying before in terms of how we sit there and try to bridge the old and the new, now and next, because it's a continuous journey. As well as the investments, as we say, that we've made in terms of the platform, the development tooling and the processes to support that, to be able to build in integration, whether it be with Visual Studio, with Eclipse, with VS Code, being able to integrate that into the co-build platform on the AWS platform. The extensions that we can do here, you have the best-in-class development tools to go with the full range of deployment options as well.
And that DevOps process shouldn't be ignored. Actually, most mainframe customers, frankly, do. They don't understand the benefits until they've actually moved. But we have other types of customer, for example, insurance customers, who've been able to dramatically accelerate the delivery of new product, even if they may want to stay on the mainframe for 2 or 3 more years until they do actually move production into cloud. They've actually been able to use DevSecOps processes on AWS to actually quadruple their ability to deliver product, to the point where, at least in 2 situations in our customers, it's the actual business that's telling them to stop the product delivery rather than IT delaying it. And that's really that's the fundamental value to the business as a whole. They can be very, very competitive in terms of delivering, but at the same time, the cost model to experiment is dramatically lower. Remember, in a development context, you can actually prototype, and you can run it into a pseudo production mode to see if customers are actually interested in these products before you actually commit to major expenditure. And that scalability and flexibility is a key component that have been used by many customers, including, in this case, FIS.
Before we move on to FIS, I mean, you just highlighted a really good point there regarding some of the challenges we see our customers having is, when they're trying to deploy new systems and applications on the mainframe, we've got certain customers that were taking between 8 and 12 weeks to provision a new LPAR to be able to actually start doing some new development work. And we work with them, with AWS, and they can actually deploy from source, fully automated source delivery build in hours. So they can actually have a full system up and running, complete environment from source in hours rather than having to wait several months for a new LPAR. But anyway, from the FIS perspective, is there anything else regarding in terms of the modernization and how they want to take those applications forward from that continuous side, from the benefits that Micro Focus has to offer in terms of the future state as well?
Well, the maturity model is a powerful use to explain to actually just sit down with the customer and actually describe the journey that they want to take. And a critical element is that as they move into cloud infrastructure, they want to take advantage of all the capabilities. To start with, they want any application to interoperate as if it's a native, I'm going to call it native cloud application, not necessarily cloud native, but it should perform just like any other application that's running in the cloud. It should be accessible to the development team as any application in the cloud. So as an example, with FIS and indeed with the other examples that we're talking about, it's that ability to test the full application stack with many layers, going out all the way to mobile. Hence, any component needs to fit into that schema. Micro Focus has delivered many different ways of doing that. One of the ways that FIS have actually taken advantage of, instead of rewriting the core business logic, which has driven their business for many years, and as I said, actually contained the competitive advantage that they were able to identify. Instead of rewriting it, they instead used Micro Focus technology to compile COBOL to Java bytecode. So any COBOL module was just fitted into the architecture as if it was been purpose designed in that context. And we know that we've done a good job with developers when they're demonstrating an application to their own managers. And within the development environment, the different modules are being kicked off as you would expect. And a COBOL module is loaded as the code flow is taken. And no one notices. Because the key element is today, it's not the language that's important, it's the development tool chain that's important. Most developers work in many different languages. Even Java has at least 6 different flavors. So programmers are used to that. The key element is that any language that's going to take a role for the future both has to be able to take advantage of that future, but also interoperate as if it's any other language component.
Good, thank you. So one of the other questions, especially when people are starting on this journey, when they're looking at a large system, we're working with customers, who have got more, significantly more than 100,000, 200,000 MIPS. So one of the first questions they always say is like, how can we, not only can it be done, it's how does it perform when it gets there? Because some of the reasons why they're trying to do this is through the scale and availability in terms of being able to thing. But what's our experience from customers in terms of how they receive their performance?
Well, you're absolutely right. The very next statement after risk is, does it perform? My mainframe environment is unique. I've invested 40 years in it. It delivers to me exactly what I want. You need to prove to me that you can replicate that performance in the new environment. Well, that's actually quite tough because many customers will then choose literally their least performant application that's the most complex to try and do some form of proof. But the reality is, when they speak to other customers that have already taken this journey and have already completed it, is that generally speaking, in moving off the mainframe, performance actually accelerates. And because of the cloud environment, because of course you can scale up and down at will, you can spin up, you don't have to run an old batch process in exactly the same way. You can run it in parallel. There are many different techniques that you can use that just were not available in a mainframe environment. Hence, for most customers, one of the biggest surprises is that applications actually run faster in cloud. It's never considered normally right at the very beginning of a project, simply because no one believes it. Hence, we don't talk about it very often. But as part of the process, we literally always have to demonstrate something like a 10% performance benefit at some point in the project, even in environments that you wouldn't even consider. Hence, we're working, as Neil suggested, with 3 clients that are over 250,000 MIPS. I mean, that's a lot of horsepower. But even in those environments, we're able to demonstrate, as you focus on specific applications, performance improvement. And you can see here with Laboral, which is banking, it can be dramatic. Sometimes we don't know that before we start, but we always assume that we can do a hell of a lot better than it's currently running. Hence, in this case, a batch process moving from 2 hours to 12 minutes. And we weren't finished. That was just the first step of the journey. And that's without doing anything complex. And so, of course, it is helping our customers move from what was typically a batch operating environment and heavily oriented around that, particularly when it's reaching out into partners, gradually moving the whole business into more of an online scenario in terms of response times to business requirements being delivered in that online framework.
I think, as you were saying there, although it's sort of hidden in the sort of simplicity of the maturity model, that approach of it's not just a maturity model by itself. There's a series of best practices, well understood in terms of how to approach the projects. And going back to that sort of both operational and architectural modernization as part of this journey of the infrastructure move, a lot of things on the existing platforms, they've been tailored and tuned specifically to remove the constraint of the platform. So a lot of the batch processing is written in a way to maximize whatever they can do in a very small batch window. Well, in a lot of systems, that doesn't need to happen. They don't need necessarily a batch window because with the power of the distributed platform and actually scaling out and running more in parallel removes the issues in terms of data latency, which means some of those batch cycles could even disappear and be running in real time. But I think that's a key aspect in terms of the onward journey for the modernization.
And I repeat it back, actually, going back to DevOps again. Remember, once this customer's off the mainframe, they can use a DevOps process to tune the applications to improve the leap forward in performance at the pace that they needed to take. They weren't limited by the infrastructure anymore. And that's the fundamental benefit. You're actually taking off the shackles that have been there for so many years and allowing the value that's been built in the applications, and indeed, in some cases, in the people that are still running those applications, that you're taking the shackles off them to be able to move at the pace that every other developer wants to move at.
Yeah, absolutely. So the other one here is, again, another case from FIS in terms of similar benefits in terms of performance.
Yeah, it's a kind of an interesting one. Everyone in the industry seems to assume that anything that's in Java is faster than anything that's been previously written, and it's uniform. And we're not trying to call out that one language is better than another. But a key concern from our customers is actually when they do move from a COBOL-based world and they start taking advantage, for example, of our compiling down to Java bytecode, that it will impact the performance. And again, it goes back to that typical perspective of a mainframe customer, which is their application's been so highly tuned to that platform that it can't possibly work as fast in any other format. Well, that turns out not to be the case. But obviously, in terms of the operations that these applications are normally performing, actually, COBOL is actually a pretty damn good language to drive that performance. And that's what, again, a lot of our customers experience. They're not expecting to see it, but they do get it.
Yep, thank you. So as we move on to that, the new platform or agile with all the best tools, it's really a case then of really the start of the journey again because of that continuous modernization. So let's have a couple of seconds now regarding the sort of innovation, how they actually can get to the next level.
Well, again, this is FIS again, and we've kind of told that story. Remember, they've gone through a series of steps with their Invest One platform to be able to support their customers using whatever is current in the technology. So the key element here is they're able to run their business, but also innovate to support their future business. And hence, that innovation word we use a lot, but it isn't typically assumed to be part of the journey of these applications that are running today. Again, I'll go back to our normal experience is the shackles that have been put around these applications because of the legacy infrastructure, not the application itself. Once you've taken the application into cloud, you've not only got an environment that's going to accelerate what you're trying to do, to essentially deliver to the demands of your customer, but of course, then you're automatically free to take advantage of all the benefits of the cloud platform itself. Hence, all your data is off the mainframe. It's making it a lot easier to drive your data strategy because it's typically in the same environment in which your other applications are running. It's easier to drive innovation from that, both within the application itself and then everything that surrounds that application. And again, it's that ability to drive a full stack for the very first time for most of the customers that we're talking about. Remember, they've probably been existing in a 3-tier architecture for, well, in this case, 30 years, and they're used to testing each layer of their architecture separately. And of course, all of the problems always happen in between the layers in the integration. Hence, again, full stack into cloud, based on DevOps, you start to see all of the productivity benefits that you'd expect to see.
I think the other point you made before regarding a rewrite strategy or whatever, which takes a long time, typically a lot of the innovation, besides the application process infrastructure that we can do around it, as they want to invest in the applications themselves, is often around 20% of the application that requires the real innovation, but they've got to spend all the time to get the other 80% up to that level. So I think that's the incremental model, I think, is reinforced by that. So let's look at the last example here regarding Kmart and what they wanted to do in terms of how that opened up the platform for other innovation.
Well, I think we've seen and heard a lot about the benefits that are available in the cloud platform as again, the technology deployment improves year on year. And all of those capabilities, every customer wants to take advantage of it. The key element is how do you truly integrate what could be your core applications and your core data with everything that you're driving in a different environment, whether it's using machine learning to drive new models, whether it's using data lake to obviously use BI. We've got a lot of different techniques in the industry to do that, but a lot of them are complexity that's been built around the platforms. Hence, the key element is by moving to cloud, all of these capabilities are normally available to you fairly instantaneously, both at a high level in an architecture, but also at a development level. And I think that's core. But for all of these customers, the value is in the data that they actually already hold. They're not trying to solve problems just using public data. They actually really need to leverage all of the experience that's both wrapped up in the applications and the data that probably has been there for 20 or 30 years. And it's only by doing that that they actually take their whole business forward rather than starting from scratch. And that's what we mean by retaining competitive advantage. Meaning it's not throw away what you have, try and build a new business. It's actually take what makes your business unique and take that forward and invest in the future.
And you say the move from mainframe to cloud means the data is now available and unlocked to be able to put into those systems. I think that's
one of the key problems with machine learning actually is creating actually creating the wrong model. It's very easy to actually create an algorithm that takes you in the wrong direction if you actually can't train the algorithm in the right way, which usually has something more to do with your own core value than anything else.
Absolutely. Good, thank you. So let's look at what we need to do in terms of what's the top tips that we've learned from our customers that they've provided back to us in terms of their modernization and migration successes.
Yeah, it's always a good one, which is if you find the right people to talk to, then you're already in a good starting point. I think there are several things. First of all, we generally try not to make projects too big. And what I mean by that is we need to accelerate at speed. You have to deliver the value of any project as fast as possible. If that value begins to disappear out into the future, it's super high risk. It's super high risk for many different reasons, one of which is actually staff turnover and actually the whole ambition behind a project getting lost along the way. But secondly, that the change in the project starts impacting the objective, hence accelerating at speed. And it's deliver at speed. Try and make it as simple and as risk-free as possible. And part of that is wrapping that with the right partners to ensure that that is delivered as quickly as possible. And so your starting point is key. That won't come as a big surprise. Executive sponsorship in your customer, in your organization is also key. This can't happen just on left field, because eventually it will impact the business. Remember, the business is probably betting its business on the move to cloud. Hence, it will always have the C-suite attention. Get the business understanding what the benefits are as fast as possible, and always refocus on that benefit throughout the entire project. Because typically it is a journey. As I said, it's quite a big journey to begin with. It might take 12 months. If you focus on the end objective and how fast you can need to get to it, then that's usually key to all the successes that we've seen. Micro Focus is quite fortunate, as you would say, isn't it, that we have very few customers that have gone off the beaten track. And normally it's because the objective changed in mid-project. And then it was difficult to support them in terms of understanding what they were truly trying to deliver. But in Micro Focus's case, there's less than customers on one hand over the many, many, many years that we've been doing this together. The second element to that is, of course, analysis, which is we look at what we're trying to do right up front. So you have executive sponsorship, business case, and solid analysis before you start. Find the traps before you commit to anything. And that's typically how we would drive it.
I think that's the key thing in terms of, as you said, the experience of knowing what works, having the market-leading tools that can actually perform the analysis, as well as a partner ecosystem that actually understands how to go on that journey with you. So all of those things combined, being clear on what it is you're trying to achieve is the best way to get that outcome, so absolutely.
I would say that we may be making it sound like it's nirvana, which is what can possibly go wrong. It isn't. There is a moment in every project, usually in the last sort of 3 months before you go live, when that's when it hits the sticky period, I would call it. That's when expertise is truly needed, because it's really when a mainframe application and all of its eccentricities are beginning to be reintegrated into the cloud environment. And then you get this is not quite working as I expected. What do we have to do? And hence, there's a very tight hand-holding between Micro Focus, our partners, AWS, and the cloud itself, as well as with the customer, to make sure to actually take it over the line live successfully with the business really comfortable.
Yeah, good point. So let's do, as a summary of what we've gone through today. I mean, we've talked a lot around the maturity model. It really is just that framework to have a conversation and actually, based on the experience, as Stuart was just describing in terms of the tips of success, of knowing what you're trying to do, how to get there, as well as then applying the tools, the techniques, and the experience to actually get the outcomes that are required. The journey is an ongoing part, but it really isn't from A to B. It's from A to B is a stop on the way. It's that continual journey which you need to go through. I mean, the biggest risk we see from a mainframe application portfolio is actually doing nothing. You can't maintain that competitive advantage. You can't be able to deliver so quickly. You can't guarantee that you're going to have the operation skills going in there in the future. How can you get to a more agile platform to improve the processes to be able to then integrate into that next level? With our focus with AMC on the application, process and infrastructure modernization on a platform like AWS with lots of partners that can deliver those solutions. And you heard today with the AWS Migration Modernization Services, the ability of actually having it built into the platform to help with a lot of that automation, the provisioning of the infrastructure, and the ability to actually integrate all those tools in a nice, defined way to get the focus on the application improvement and take away some of the complexity from some of those systems, but even down to the operations, auto-scaling, auto-handling all the updates. The mechanisms that we've got and the partnership we've had and demonstrated from the result announcements today really gives you the platform to be able to invest in those applications. So the key thing in most of these is to get started, to understand what you're trying to do, engage with us, engage with AWS, try to understand what it is you need to achieve, and we can then help you move on to that next part of the journey.
I think the key element as well is you're going to take the people with you. Remember, one of the smaller reasons why customers will look at moving mainframe to cloud is their perception of skills and their skills gap, meaning their own staff are aging, they may be going close to retirement, they don't have people who know the platform anymore. That's often a subliminal driver that we see. And indeed, we see many customers where you'd have to say they had reached a point where the business risk was so high around the skills that really they should have done something probably 10 years ago. The benefit of moving mainframe applications to cloud is whoever has the experience goes on the journey as well. And as that experience is being integrated to, shall we say, the younger development communities that exist in all of our businesses. And that melding of the experience means there is a transfer of knowledge to the next generation, and it's not lost. So, in other words, this is a process which both accelerates the ability of the company to adapt and innovate. It's taking dramatic advantage of the cloud architecture to scale the business, whether it is scaling up or down, but at the same time, it's taking people on the journey as well.
So that's it. Hopefully you found that useful and to give a bit more of a perspective from a customer perspective rather than just hearing about the capabilities of the software. So delighted if you have any questions. Obviously happy to have conversations. Micro Focus booth in the expo hall where we've got lots of gurus there ready to help. So I can't see because of the lights. I can't, if anybody has a question. If you do, please shout out. So just as just because for the how quiet it is, do we have experience of migrating other systems out besides ZOS, maybe TPF or other systems as well? Do you want to go first, and I'll I'll follow up.
You don't by any chance come from an airline, by any chance? Normally, as soon as we hear TPF, it comes from a very small community. To answer the broader question, yes, we do. It's most mainframe customers come with a set of, should we call it baggage, that are attached, both legacy infrastructure, but occasionally legacy software components. And that does, if there is no easy way to move those components to the cloud, then they do go through a rewrite or a refactor exercise. Hence, even inside Micro Focus, whatever your view of us, we use the we'll at least use 3 of the R's in terms of patterns, even when we're doing any migration ourselves. Some of them are very challenging. Typically, if you're getting into a lot of assembler, or indeed you're now referring to TPF, which is almost another level of complexity beyond that. Assembler we have obviously a lot of experience in dealing with. TPF is probably almost a challenge too far for a simple answer to that question. Again, the starting point is always, you've got to look at the analysis. That's your starting point. There are 1 or 2 occasions that we have come across where, frankly, we would even recommend that those application components are rewritten just because they are too complex for any automation or automated tool to do the conversion. It would just be too high a risk. So TPF is an interesting conversation, but it does need to be a conversation. There's no yes/no answer to it.
And the wider context, and specific, the question started a little bit more broadly, but we're very used to, and a lot of our businesses come from Fujitsu, Unisys, HP, Bull. We've got lots of other practices. I mean, we're specifically talking around, as you say, the ZOS side here, but we've also got lots of partners that specialize in those migration practices, and we've been doing those for decades very successfully as well. So those ones, but TPF is special. Happy to have a conversation with you afterwards as well, but there's no easy answer for that one to start with.
Yeah, I have to be honest, just TPF I need to sit down when I start talking about that. It's not an easy one. But the benefit, if there is a benefit of having the conversation, Micro Focus has sort of a community of probably mainframe experts in every legacy component you could possibly imagine. And hence, we normally know the very best person probably in the world to talk about doing something. And that's normally how we assemble a project to tackle a particular customer scenario based on, frankly, our reputation is based on delivering successful customer outcomes. We are not interested in, tire kicking in essence, and looking at an application where it would scare us and where the best recommendation for the customer is to do something else and have that conversation. So, frankly, we have done that in a TPF scenario before. We just thought it was too complex to tackle. And we will be honest, because our reputation probably matters more than anything else.
I don't know whether there's anybody else, because I can't, the lights up here are quite bright, so you can't see anybody.
Clearly, we started with the best one.
Yeah. Thank you for the question there. Well, for that, thank you very much for your time. Appreciate the attention. Hopefully you found that useful, and we'll be delighted to see you at the booth. So please come and see us afterwards. Thank you.